Welcome everybody to the first lesson of biotechnology, biodiversity and biotechnology. This lesson will be an introduction to bio-based technologies. But before we get to that, I want to explain a few things about the course itself. So let me upload the syllabus. The syllabus you can find on Blackboard as a PDF. I'll show this to you now. Let me increase the size. No, how do I do that? Oh, there we go. That's too much. Okay. So, the course is Biodiversity and Biotechnology of the Environmental Geography minor. This is the course manual for 2016-2017. You are mostly fourth-year students. There are a few exchange students and third-year students, but the second period, obviously, of Avans University of Applied Science. So, this is the table of contents, an introduction, what the goals are, content, methods, study material, program, and assessments and assessment criteria. Okay, introduction. Let's bring this down a little bit. So, as I mentioned yesterday in the presentation, that right now we're using crude oils in refineries, but crude oil is just one source of a molecule that you can use for making fuel and for making products such as plastics, medicine, food. We can also transform certain molecules that we can find in biomasses, and this is what we call biorefining. So you might have heard of oil refinery, using oil and refining it to make different kinds of things, plastics, medicines, etc. But you can also use molecules from biology. This biorefining is a key role in the bio-based technology, bio-based economy. It leads to sustainable production of food, feed, energy. We'll go over that. It's also called the bio-based pyramid. Maybe some of you have heard of that before. Biorefining is a collective name for a number of key technologies, so we'll be going over that. Pretreatment, biochemical and biotechnology synthesis, so including fermentation, etc. Organic synthesis, such as transesterification, thermochemical synthesis, gasification, and different separation technologies, which a couple of these you will be doing in your project. So it's rather important for you to understand this. You can think of biorefinery as combining different Lego pieces, yeah? So we're going to look at biodiversity as chemists, as physical scientists, and we're going to try to separate the whole into its parts, into its Lego piece, let's say, because it has a structure. So we want to separate these pieces from each other and combine them in new ways. And that's what really refining is. Biorefining is just using these biological molecules. Our goals, so you'll be able to link biomasses to bio-based products and the necessary conversion techniques. You will apply biorefining definition, identify biorefining features, identify suitable mechanical, physical, and/or pre-treatment methods, know the definition and aims of conversion processes, know about catalysis and how we classify catalysts. So catalysis is the verb of what catalysts do. Identify suitable conversion processes for a specific biorefinery. So let's say amino acids or proteins or biofuels. And calculate mass balance and conversion level for biorefinery scheme, a conceptual design, let's say. And that's exactly what you need to do for your project. We'll be working on the competences of research, etc. We will be doing, there's actually 7 classes, but some of them are divided in 2. Our methods, we will have seven classes of 2 hours each. The assignments have a combined total of about 25 hours and self-study. including if you would like to learn more this literature. However, you can do all of the assignments using the presentation and some things on the internet, which I will provide links for in the presentation. However, if you want to do your own research, it's very much encouraged, but not necessary. This is not very easy to see, but the program today is from 10:35 to 11:30, so about another half an hour. I'll give you a lecture on Introduction to Biobased Technology. The next hour and a half, you will have to do your assignment based on the lecture, which is on Blackboard and must be uploaded to Blackboard when you're finished. We have about an hour break. I think we start at 1:50. Then at 1:50, we have the second lecture called Biomass Composition, followed again by time reserved for you to do your assignments. And that's why this course is taught in a computer course, a computer room. So some of you are at home, of course use your computer at home, but if you're here, the room is yours until this morning until 1 o'clock. So use that time to do your assignments. Of course you can take a coffee break, etc. And I will be here. I'll be in this room physically. Of course, I might get coffee too, but if you have questions, and I will leave the big blue button running, so that if you have questions, I can answer them hopefully. So that's both of the assignments are due. Today's assignments are due before tomorrow's course at 10:35. Okay, so it's designed so that you have a lecture and you do your homeworks and then a break, and then the lecture, you do the homeworks, and then you go on with your life until tomorrow. If you, however, decide that you want to work on it, for example, after the lecture ends at 2:45, you think, well, I want to do it, take a longer break and finish the assignment this evening. That's fine, but I really want you to finish each lesson before you go to the next lesson. And so to encourage this, I'm requiring you to the assignments before the next day's lessons. So you come with a fresh start. You're not worrying about doing the assignment from yesterday. Okay? And so tomorrow's course, again, there are two lessons. They will also be due before the lesson on Thursday at 12. And there's only one lesson on Thursday. That assignment is due before Friday's class, and we have two lessons on Friday, and they are due before midnight on Friday, so that you go into the weekend with a clean, fresh start and ready to do the project assignments next week. The assignments, they're all found on Blackboard. They must be turned into Blackboard. It says no. I had to change that. That's an old one. So it has to be turned in on time for the next day's class. Ignore this sentence. They must be done individually. You may not copy from any source, including other students. For more information on plagiarism, see the student handbook. Fortunately, this year I haven't seen any kind of problems with plagiarism. Let's please keep it this way. I really don't like having to send students to the Academic Honesty Committee. There are 7 assignments, so they are done individually. All assignments from one day are due before that class the next day. So this is what I was talking about. So today's 2 assignments are due before tomorrow's class. The last assignments on Friday are due before midnight of the last day, right? So Friday's 2 lessons are due before midnight. The assignments will be evaluated on a scale of 1 to 10. Your final score is an average of these 7 assignments. If your final score is below an average of 5.5, then you must take the exam which will then replace your failed score. Hopefully no one falls into that category. Until now, everybody's always at least gotten at least a 5.5. A few more points. Assignments are submitted to Blackboard, be graded on a 10-point scale, and we must receive an average of 5.5 or higher to pass the course on your final. But you can compensate. So if you get a 10 on one and a 4 on the other, you don't have to redo the one with the 4. All right. Are there any questions? I hope that was clear. I think you'll get the hang of it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So as I mentioned, I this morning I had to run to the IT department, and so after I wasn't done until like 10 o'clock, and then in the half an hour I only had time to upload the syllabus and the syllabus and the first three assignments and the presentations. When I'm done with this class, I'll upload the last four assignments as well. It just it takes a little bit of time to set the due dates, etc. But thank you for that question. Any other questions from anybody here or in Big Blue Button? No? If not, of course, you know how to find me. I'm I'm just sitting right here. And we'll go back to the other presentation that we'll talk about today. So in the next about half hour, we'll talk about the what is a biobased technology. It's an introduction. What we will learn this morning in the first lecture, just a general introduction to the topic, getting to know the basic concepts, know and apply the definitions of bio-based economy and biorefineries, know the types of products and their value on the F ladder, which is the replacement actually of the bio-based pyramid. You'll see what that is. It's just more detailed. An introduction to several biorefinery examples, and this will be further elaborated in much more detail in the lectures in the next week. All right. Biobased and the biorefinery. So a few definitions. Okay. There was a workshop in Latin America in 2012 where they came up with a few bioeconomy themes that were addressed in the workshop. Biotechnology and products and processes of biotechnology, biorefinery and bioenergy, sustainable use of biodiversity, and ecological intensification. We will be focusing in this course on the first three, but even more on three. So we'll be looking at the different types of biomass and what are the differences between them. For example, there's more than one type of potato, there's more than one type of grass. We're looking at the differences between them. But we're looking at them on a refinery level as a biotechnology. It's different than, let's say, an ecologist would look at biodiversity. They have different goals. Okay, so here's an example. Here's a website that is using live butterflies, selling them for weddings and other happy occasions. I assume happy occasions. I can't imagine buying butterflies for I don't know, your an audit, a tax audit, so graduations, marriage ceremonies. And then here at this website, you can buy butterflies. So the question is set to you, and it's just a yes, no answer. You can type it in the chat on the right. Is this part of the bio-based economy? Selling butterflies. Oh, the nose coming strong. And if you're watching this at a later date, this is November 8th, 2016. So there's a general election in the United States. This is kind of like the vote. So we have the no took a big leap at the beginning, then a yes, and then there's a maybe. A lot of people didn't say anything. Come on, guys, don't be shy. Pulse, yes or no? Can you type it in? We're all gonna die in the end. There's a question of if the butterflies will die. Yes, I guess it depends on where you release them and when, but they die eventually. Butterflies can't eat, I don't think. So I'm not a biologist, but I don't think butterflies live very long. Okay, lots of no's and a couple of yeses. So I'm going to give you my answer. Well, I'm not going to give you my answer. I'm going to give you the definition first, and then I'm going to see if people have changed their minds. So the definition of bio-based or bio-based economy or bio-based technology is a technological development that leads to a significant replacement of fossil fuels by biomass in the production of pharmaceuticals, chemicals, materials, transportation, fuels, electricity, and heat. And this is written in a book, The Biobased Economy, edited by Langeveld, Saunders, and Meuse. By the way, this guy in the middle, Saunders, Johan Saunders, is your client for the project, and he will be there on Thursday. While I'm here, I will just say I hope that most people can come to his presentation on Thursday. It'll be a very good moment to meet your client. So it will be uploaded, his presentation and the presentations of David from the Center of Expertise. But I hope most of you can come to his presentation. So Lara says, if you recollect the butterflies, then maybe if you just release them into the sky, then no. Well, here's the thing. It's a replacement of fossil fuels. So do the butterflies replace the fossil fuels in any way? Normally there would be like rice. If it's a wedding, yeah, so no. It is a biomass. Wait, if we very good, Yannick. That's a good point. That's someone who if you burn the butterflies afterwards, then the answer was yes. Actually, I don't think you get much energetic worth from burning the butterflies, but hey, it does release some heat. Or maybe if you put them on a wheel so that they generate electricity. But unless you're doing that, then the answer is more no. Nah, the thing is, it's still not replacing a fossil fuel. You're replacing the pigeons with butterflies, sure. And also the second part is it a pharmaceutical? Is it a chemical? Is it a material like plastic? Is it transportation fuel? Are you using if you use the butterflies to fly, you'll need a lot of butterflies though. Electricity and heat. Yeah, yeah. You could pulling a car by butterfly. That I would like to see that. I'm not even sure they could pull a string attached to the car. Uh, it would be a nice trick. Giant butterflies. Yeah. But how would you attach all the strings? I don't know. Tie them to their butterfly feet? I just don't know. Maybe in space, if you could somehow make little space suits, they could pull something. Now we're going slightly absurd. But thank you for the creative responses. There are many drivers and reasons why we want to go to a bio-based economy. A shortage of cheap oil. So maybe you guys don't remember. I remember when petrol used to cost less than $1 a gallon, which is 25 cents a liter approximately. And how much does it cost now? Very high energy prices. I'd like to bring the energy prices down. Security of energy supply. Security of energy supply is very important, especially if, like in the Netherlands, you import most of your energy. Climate change by greenhouse gases. Rural developments. So there's lots of issues in rural developments, either changing from a food crop to an energy crop, etc. Developing countries, which also have high energy demands, and geopolitical conditions. There have been many, 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 many wars that have been fought over access to oil. So these are all very good reasons, either political, scientific, or economic, to move towards a bio-based economy. There are 7 components we came out of a brainstorm session at the IEA conference, and these components are sustainability. So we need to maximize the economics, making it socially acceptable and an optimal environmental performance. So at the minimum environmental impact. Processing. You have different types of processing we'll get into later, actually towards the end of the course. So you have upstream processing. So that's like designing what you want as your main process. Transformation, the transformation of, let's say, a residue. Fractionation, which is the splitting of soluble components. Thermochemical and biochemical conversion. Again, we'll be going into much more detail later. So converting one thing to another thing. Extraction of, for example, proteins from a lignocellulose material. Separation techniques like column or chromatography. And downstream processing. So once you have your product, you have a residue, what do you do with it downstream? Or you've made your product, but it's in liquid form. How do you get it out of liquid form? That's also downstream processing. Biomass. Biomass includes residues. We use the word residues, but really it means trash, waste. Yeah. So if you're going to have corn and you're making corn, then the residue would be what's left over. It's the stalks, it's the leaves, it's the roots, but not the corn itself. So the crop is what you're going for. Another type of biomass being used is algae right now, and one of the groups in the project is looking at macroalgae. There's a spectrum, so multiple product outlets. It needs to be marketable. It has to be able to make money. Otherwise, it will never work. It won't be economically sustainable. Bio-based products, so feed, food, chemicals, materials, and energy, fuels, power, and heat. These are the brainstorm definitions of biorefineries as defined by the IEA Bioenergy Conference. So what is a what is a biorefinery? What is biorefining? The definition is set as it being a sustainable process that's in the processing of biomass into a spectrum of bio-based products. So food, feed, chemicals, material, and also bioenergy, so biofuels, power, and or heat. So here's this biomass. Let it be chicken feathers or lemna or grass or whatever. It goes into a biorefinery, and it is split apart into different streams. So it go from heat, power, fuels, chemicals, food, feed, and material. So petroleum refinery produces mostly fuels and energy and a bit of chemistry. And a biorefinery instead of petroleum, you use biomass. So you make fuels and energy, but you make different types. You make bioethanol, biodiesel, biogas, or hydrogen, and also a large amount of products. So fine chemicals, biopolymers, and bioplastics. And biorefining, now we're going into that prism that we showed earlier. You can take raw materials and you can boost it by plant breeding or genetic modification. You process it by separating it into different units. You have an intermediate unit, so now you no longer have a raw material, but you have an intermediate material. You process it and into these different products. And to do that, you use processing technologies, food technology, environmental economies, and thermodynamics. So you're going from raw materials, separating them to intermediates, processing the intermediates, and making products. Okay, so an introduction of the context. A biorefinery, we'll talk about definition, biomass source, typical products. We'll be using the example of potato to starch and protein, biofuels, and the chains. Okay, total crop yields. So why is uh, uh, dry mass so important? There are a few rule of thumbs. I talked about a little bit yesterday during the kickoff of the project, but here you see different types of biomasses. Yeah, so you have cassava, grass, lucerne, maize, corn for some of you, oil palm, potato, rapeseed, sorghum, soybean, etc. I'm not going to read them all off, but they have a certain yield per acre of a hectare in this case of soil of land. So on here on the left axis, the y-axis, you see tons of that crop per hectare of land. So the cassava, the green column, is the wet biomass. Yeah, so it produces about 84 tons of cassava per hectare. Soybean is much lower. Sunflower is maybe the lowest. It only produces about, I'm guessing about 18 tons per hectare of wet biomass. That means biomass that's living biomass. However, not every plant has the same percentage of water. Some plants have a much higher water content. An example, tobacco, which has an extremely high yield, extremely high, of 240 tons per hectare of land. So the crop yield is very high. However, tobacco contains a very high percentage of water. And once you take that into account, it only has about 28 tons per hectare. And we don't really want water when we're doing a biorefinery. Water is something that we get rid of. Um, Other plants, such as sorghum, have a much lower crop yield than either tobacco, sugarcane, sugar beets, or rapeseed or maize. It only about 75%, 75 tons per hectare. However, the percentage of water in sorghum is quite low, about 50%. So if you look at dry mass, sorghum becomes a very interesting plant for a biorefinery because of its high dry mass. So that's all in your project. One of the most important essential things that you do, like one of the very first experiments that you do, which is the easiest of all of your experiments in the lab, will be finding the dry mass of what you are studying, just so that you even can think about, is this an interesting biomass or biorefinery? A rule of thumb is that if you can generate 30 tons per hectare per dry weight, then it's a very interesting plant material. If you can get about 20 tons per hectare of dry weight, then you're doing okay. Above 10, it's good, and below 10 tons per hectare of per dry weight, then it's probably not useful as a biomass. The composition, we're going to go into more detail, but the composition you also need to take into consideration. So if we, in our example, sorghum was extremely interesting, sorghum, and it has a lot of carbohydrates, simple and complex hydrates, a small amount of lignin, let's say about 10%, between 10 and 15, I'd say maybe 12%, a not very low percentage of proteins. There are of course, plant material with less proteins than sorghum, and a small amount of fat. If you were designing a biorefinery for sorghum, what would you design it for? And I'm going to ask for the people who are who are at home or in here in class. Looking at this chart, what would if you had a biorefinery for sorghum? what would you want to get out of it? Seeing the percentages, would you go for carbohydrates? Would you go for lignin? Would you go for protein? Or would you try to isolate fat? What would you want to extract? Yeah, the carbohydrates in general. Yeah. See, the simple or the complex hydrates, carbohydrates. Seems like the correct answer. Ooh. The question is now, I understand I would do the same thing. It was a little bit of a trick question. I kind of tricked you. Because maybe the largest percentage is carbohydrates. But then the question is, well, what are you going to do with the carbohydrates once you isolate them? How much are carbohydrates worth? Proteins, are they worth a lot more? And is it easier to get? Um, Sorry, lignin. What can you use lignin for? So if for example, and let's do it the other way around. Let's say, for example, you want to isolate protein. Of which of these biomasses would you choose from this chart? What has the largest percentage of protein? Yeah, so ethanol. But that's the thing, is that ethanol is pretty darn cheap. I think you can get a yeah. Yeah, PLA. You're thinking good. You're thinking right. Your thinking is going the right way. You could use the carbohydrates to make bioplastics from fermentation in reactors with E. coli. So you're right there. But then that's you start thinking, well, how much does that cost? And okay, nobody has an idea. Which one would you want to get protein? Which of these has the highest percentage of protein? People just staring at it. Proteins, yeah, proteins is this color. Well, sunflower or lucerne or grass. Wow, look at that. What a coincidence. That there are companies that isolate proteins from grass. It's not a coincidence. No. Sunflowers. Suddenly, sunflowers, which had a horrible yield. Remember sunflowers? If we go back one, look at the yield for sunflowers. It was quite low. Well, it was almost that good, but it has sunflowers have a lot of protein. And if you can somehow get it from a downstream on the cheap, maybe it's good. So you have to kind of think. You have to think on a scale of first, what's the crop yield, and is it at all interesting, and what's the dry mass from that? Then secondly, what are the constituents of the biomass? Uh, Third, how much are the biomass constituents worth? Four, what can you make from them? So, and that's just the beginning. Then you think about transportation costs, etc. But you guys are already starting to think about the biorefinery in the correct way, so that's good. So these are there's a larger list that I just did a few. So cost per ton, yield per hectare, composition, transport properties, storage properties. Let's say as sugar beet people, sugar beets are only come out a few months a year. What are you gonna do with the leaves? How are you gonna store it? So seasonality, processability. Some things are easier to process than others. Value of the products, genetic improvements. Can you genetically improve it? GMOs. Production chain, geographic region, also rather important, and agronomic considerations, so soil quality, water rotation, etc. All considerations when looking at it. Okay. Now I've taken 6 of those from the list, and I have 4 different um, biomasses: wood, grass, potato, and cassava. And I'm going to fill it in. The next sheet is filled in. The presentation it's filled in with pluses and minuses. So I'm going to look at wood. Have a good composition? Does it have Does it have high proteins? Does it have high carbohydrates that I can use? How much does wood cost? It depends. Wood chips are pretty cheap. What's the value of the products you can make from it? Can you genetically improve the tree by either modification or just um, agriculture? How good is storage of wood? And what are the transportation costs for wood? So I've filled all of these in for you. So, looking at all the pluses and minuses, so wood has not a, has some things in it that we can use. Lots of carbohydrates. It's not very expensive, so the cost per ton is good. The value of the products isn't very high. The products most that you can use from wood is through pyrolysis to make biofuels, and biofuels are on the bottom of value. It's very difficult to genetically improve trees. It takes many years. The apple trees, the apples that we're getting nowadays have taken. If you go to the grocery store and you buy like these new apple types, Gala and Fuji, it actually takes like hundreds of years to develop them. Storage of wood is quite good. Actually, the longer you store wood, the better it is as a product. It becomes drier. It's easily stored and it's easy to transport it. Grass, however, while it has good value of products, it's also cheap in composition. It's almost impossible to improve it. Storage is not that good. Grass loses, for example, its proteins within a day or two, and it's difficult to transport because it's so light and to get it all together. Potatoes, composition is okay. The price is not that great. Value of product is quite good. You can improve the potato quite easily. We know a lot about the genetic code of potato. It's not very good at storage. The carbohydrates that you could use from potatoes convert quite quickly, and the transportation costs are okay. Cassava, composition is fantastic. The cost is pretty good. The value is pretty good. You can improve the cassava. However, storage is bad, and it's difficult. It's a little bit difficult to transport. Oh, grass in general, it's wild grass. So to improve, thank you for the question, Yannick. It's in the chat. Uh, Grass, it's not something that you can genetically improve, especially if it's coming from the wild. So most grass biorefineries use wild grass, and they go around and clip the grass from the sides of highways or from people turning it in from their lawn. And it's difficult to like pass legislation that says everybody must use this type of grass. Um, a very good question, Yannick. Yeah. Right. So genetic improvement. We used to teach a course, and it's no longer taught at ATGM, environmental science. You can change the DNA structure of. You can genetically modify plants um, to grow faster, to be hardy, to make them produce more proteins, and it's some things it's easier to do. Other ways of genetically improving is through like animal husbandry or uh, picking the species that performs the best and breeding it to make it like imagine making a super lemna. If you put lemna together and made you know somehow improved it so they could be better. Have like a lemna breeding program, and they do a lot of that in Wageningen. So if you're interested in that, I suggest it's the world's top institute for doing that. They are very busy producing new types of tomatoes that are square shaped, so you can fit them in boxes, or that are very durable, so they can be transported more easily. And they don't necessarily. Sometimes they do it with GMOs, but other times it's just by finding different types of potatoes. There are, for example, or sunflowers, and finding which one has the best quality. Okay, negative values. Can we cope with negative values? For example, genetics. A lot of legislation about genetics, for what you can use, what you cannot use, and using GMOs, and you certainly cannot release them into the wild. Negative values of the agronomy and genetics. Can you change the agronomy if you are a country that's very heavily dependent on a certain crop? For example, sugar beets in the Netherlands or sugar cane in Brazil. How is it to change? What about other costs such as fertilizers, chemicals, the region, tariffs, harvest costs? Storage. How can you store it to make it better? Do you use like nitrogen so that it doesn't oxidize and make it extend the storage ability of the product? Wood doesn't. It's mostly lignocellulose, so there's not a lot of things that can go wrong. But sugar beets, or any kind of green material, they deteriorate extremely fast. I'm sure you guys know this already. If you leave like lettuce out of the refrigerator for more than like an hour, a couple hours, it'll already start turning brown. And another thing is dewatering before transportation. So some products have a lot of water and they are quite heavy to transport. If you could dewater it before transporting it, then you would really lower the transportation costs. So that's another way of coping. But how do you dewater it before transportation? It all has a cost. Okay. The last few sheets, I talked about it yesterday. I've tried to improve the sheet. It was confusing. I think it's still maybe a little bit confusing, but less confusing than yesterday. Grass. Let's take grass for example. Grass, if you don't split it up, is worth about 60 euros per ton. You can feed grass to horses, to cows, to sheep, so it has a value. Just grass as alone by itself is 60 euros a ton. So therefore, you get 60 euros a ton total. However, if you were to divide it between fibers, which is lignocellulose, proteins, and juice, so it's 30% fiber, which is worth 100 euros, 15% protein. A generic protein mix is about 800 euros a ton. The juice is 55%. It's also worth 100. So 30% times 100 is 30. 15 times 800 is 120. 55% times 100 is 55. You add that up, you get 205 euros per ton. So grass, just by itself, is worth about 60 euros per ton. If you were to biorefine it into just these three, you'd get about 205 euros per ton. The thing is, how much does it cost? Here, it only costs you to mow it and to transport it, basically. And here, you have the extra biorefinery costs on top. To go further, still using grass, what if you split it up more and more and more? What if you split up the proteins into different types of proteins? What if you looked at the monosaccharides and you split them also up? What if you could isolate the amino acids that are free in the grass juice, etc.? If you were to do this kind of calculation with the worth, the costs, well, one of the reasons why I'm giving this to you now is because I would like to. This is your data that you can use for your project. So don't forget this sheet. It's on one of the in the first lecture one of the sheets that you want to use in your project as well. So especially the grass people, this is great. But for all of you, because it's all green biomass, you're all doing green biorefineries. So you should use this sheet for everything. Right here, for calculating about how much you can get from that biomass. So first, determine the dry mass of your of your product. No, that wouldn't be total product. That would be total revenue. So it's you have a product. Do the GIS people need to figure out where you find it, how much is there, how much yield you'll get? Find the dry mass. Figure out what products components are in it and what you can make from it. Look at the revenue here on the right side of the sheet, and then possibly estimate costs. And this is all part of your biorefinery design, from conception to mass balance to revenue and costs. So it'll take you a bit of time to do all of that and be specific for a region. So you're not doing a theoretical project. You're doing specifically for either the Netherlands or for Brabant. Oh, so what would the total profit be? That's a good question, Lara, and that's for you guys to figure out. Maybe we won't make a profit. Maybe it would also be good to ask questions to Johan Sanders about this, since he owns a business making it. So it's obviously somehow profitable. Here we now have, before we talked about the biobased pyramid, and it's been recently divided into the F ladder, in which as you go up, or in this case you go down the F ladder, as you go down the F ladder or the biobased pyramid, the lower the added value, and the higher the volume you need. So if you're using an energy crop like wood for pyrolysis, you need a whole bunch of it, a large volume, but the added value you get from it is low. But of course, energy is very important, so don't think it's something you should dismiss. Fuel or energy, it's very important, especially if you have a lot of wood lying around, like say you live in Finland and you have lots and lots of trees and they grow quite fast. You can really look into pyrolysis. Netherlands, it might be a problem, but in other parts of the world, it's not. Chemistry, using fermentation technologies, as Hugh, you mentioned, making PLA or ethanol from fermentation. This would be also fertilizers, so these are chemicals. You need still quite a bit of volume. You need a lot of carbohydrates to fuel the microorganisms that make PLA, for example. And the added value of making plastics is slightly higher than the energy. So alimentation, food and feed, is even has a higher value. This could be amino acids. This is proteins, sugars also, salts, and on the top is pharmaceuticals and fine chemicals, so like vinyl and chemical and medicine. Okay, we're going towards the end. So here we have the typical products. So fuel use bio-oil, ethanol, biogas. The feed, soil meal, and DDGS. Does anybody know what DDGS stands for? It stands for dried distillery grains and solids. DDGS. It's a generic term for any kind of like wheat or barley, any kind of a grain product. So it's dried distillery grains and solids. Food, such as starch and sugar, fiber, board and paper, polymers such as polylactic acid, PLA, chemicals, lactic acid, and glycerol. Mostly these last ones are quite often done by fermentation. And glycerol is quite often a byproduct of the fermentation, but hey ho. The bio-oils and all the fibers can be done by mechanical separation. We're going to go into much more detail, don't worry, in future classes. This is just the introduction course, remember that. Fermentation, ethanol, biogas, lactic acid, done by fermentation. To be honest, glycerol, quite a bit too. Glycerol as a byproduct of fermentation, like algae. They produce glycerol, they don't even want it. They're trying to get other things from it. They have to separate glycerol out. And chemistry. So you can make polylactic acid and glycerol through chemical processes. Oh yeah, if you want, I'll write down that. So it's dried dis. Oh gosh, now I'm gonna. My poor spelling. Distillery grains and solids. Did that go through? Oh, there you go. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. No, it can't be right. That's distillery. Sorry. I hope you got the idea. I'm so dependent on. That's not distillery. It's distillery. I've visited so many breweries and whiskey. You'd think I'd know how to spell that by now. Thank you, Ocean. Okay, so it's part of a chain. The last few sheets. Don't forget that it's not only replacing oil, it's also part of a chain. Take the whole chain into account. A lot of things you get for free, basically. Grass, chicken feathers, sugar beet leaves. These are all byproducts as part of a chain. And where would you place the biorefinery in that chain? Would you put it where, like, sugar beets are grown in one place and they're processed in another place? So would you put the biorefinery of the leaves at the farm or at the sugar processing plant? One has advantages over the other. If you put it on the agriculture side at the farm, you don't have to transport the water, so it's at much lower transport costs. But on the factory, it's in a central location, and you have a much larger amount of sugar beet leaves. Oh no, sound and video gone? Well, sorry about that. Um, okay, so this last sheet I'm going to show you as part of the lesson. So you just click on this link here, and it will take you to a website where you can select the different routes from the different biomasses. So take a look at this website. And start your assignments.